Hello, my dear friends. I really miss you, and I think I'm going to miss you even more this Shabbos HaGadol, because I'm so used to coming into a full sanctuary for us all to get together for the Shabbos HaGadol drasha, which is so meaningful for me to be able to connect with you on that way. I note that a number of Rabbanim are giving their Shabbos HaGadol drashas on video conference, either before Shabbos or after Shabbos. What I've decided to do for this year is send you out the Shabbos HaGadol drasha in essay form, so that you have a chance to actually read it over Shabbos in its fullness, and to be able to get all of the ideas that I wanted to present, some of my musings over our current situation. And I figured I would just give you a short sort of synopsis on this short video that I'm going to be sending out before Shabbos. If you are watching this on YouTube, you'll also be able to see in the description a link to the download of the file as well with the essay. I wanted to give you just a brief synopsis, but let me introduce it with a Devar Torah that's not in the essay, and that is having to do with this Torah reading that we're going to read, the Shabbos Parshas Tzav, which is so easy to overlook because it's not one of the more exciting parshiot, because it goes through a lot of the technical protocol of bringing the various korbanos, the sacrifices in the temple and in the Mishkan. And the very opening of Parshas Tzav is where God says to Moshe, Tzav es Aharon v'espanav lemor, give charge to Aaron and his children, Zot Torah ha'olah. This is the law of the Olah, of the ascending sacrifice. Hi ha'olah. This is the ascension that must take place, that it must burn on the altar the entire night. The commentaries in the Talmud and the Medrash are replete with observations about the unusual language. First of all, it says Tzav et Aharon, give charge to Aaron. We don't find that language by other korbanos. Usually it says Daber el Aharon, speak to Aaron, or simply Vizos Toras, or this is the law of. But Tzav means that you have to give extra charge in this particular mitzvah. And why is the sacrifice called an Olah? Well, an Olah simply means that it's completely burnt to God. Why not call it an Eish sacrifice or a Mokedah sacrifice? An Olah means that it actually goes up. And I believe that there's a deeper message in the word going up, because the whole theme of my Shabbos HaGadol drasha is based on the very end of Parshat Shemini, which is the Torah portion that we're going to read on the Shabbos following Pesach. The very end of Parshat Shemini concludes with a discussion of the forbidden foods that we're not allowed to eat according to the Torah, different organisms and creatures that God says we're not allowed to come in contact with and we're not allowed to consume. And at the very end of that section, after the Torah has detailed the laws of shiratzim, of swarming creatures that are low to the earth, such as insects and rodents and reptiles, the Torah says don't come in physical contact with many of them because they're a source of tumah, of ritual impurity. And certainly you may not consume these small swarming creatures like insects and reptiles and worms and roaches and things like that, because you will defile yourself with them. And then the Torah ends off by saying, Ki ani Hashem hama'aleh etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elokim. I am the God, your Lord, who has lifted you up from the land of Egypt. Now, Rav Soloveitchik points out something interesting. He says that there are three categories of mitzvot that the Torah associates with God taking us out of Egypt. One has to do with all of the observances that we do, like Pesach and the Shalosh Regalim and Tefillin and redemption of the firstborn, that are directly related to remembering the Exodus from Egypt. There's another set of laws that have to do with ethical conduct. God says, I don't want you to be like the Egyptians were. They were immoral, they were unethical. I want you to be a people of a higher ethical and moral fiber, such as don't oppress the convert, the widow, and the orphan. Don't be like the Egyptians who oppressed you. But finally, there's a third category, and that has to do with things that involve indulgence. Don't indulge in forbidden relationships, the arayot. Don't indulge in forbidden foods. And that also is associated with God taking us out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt so that you would be an upstanding moral people that would not be self-indulgent. But here in particular, this idea of I am God who lifted you up from Mitzrayim, associated directly with shiratzim, the consumption and the contact with swarming creatures that are low to the earth, is something that is a bit mysterious. Why Hashem associates the idea of taking us out of Egypt with the prohibition of eating shiratzim. And that's really the topic of the drasha, and you'll see as it unfolds why Egypt is associated with shiratzim, and God says, I lifted you up from there. You know, it's also interesting because when it talks about God taking us out of Egypt, everywhere else in the Torah, it's God is hamotzi etchem. I take you out of Egypt, or I took you out of Egypt. And here, uniquely, with the connection to these shiratzim creatures, God says, hama'aleh eschem. I lifted you up. I lifted you up. And so the thesis that we develop in this drasha is essentially this. Egypt as a culture, as an ideology, viewed the world from a bottom-up kind of worldview, in that they felt that we are the architects of our own destiny. If we want to be able to see how we can harness and control the world, we look down and then we extrapolate and look upwards from there. In other words, let's look at the things that are close to the ground. Since we control them, we dominate them, and then we can work upwards and say how we're going to take over the world. As I point out from ancient Egyptian history of the various deities, the Egyptians used to worship the scarab, which is the dung beetle, and they viewed that as a deity, and from there they extrapolated from the behavior of the dung beetle about how the motions of the celestial bodies worked. And you'll see more detail in the drasha itself. But we as the Jewish people are just the opposite. God says, I don't want you to look at the ground and work your way upwards. I want you to look up at the sky. I want you to look at the source of everything coming from something above you and bring it down to this world. It's instead of being a bottom-up process, I want it to be from an up going downwards process, that you, the Jewish people, are humble and you recognize that there is a God in heaven. That's why the very first mitzvah that Hashem gave us was HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Look up at the moon. Use that as your exemplar, as how you're supposed to live your lives. Stop looking at the ground like the Egyptians did. In any event, that's the theme. Tzav et Aharon, give charge to Aharon, because the fact of the matter is that if you want an example of what it means to live your life as a Jew, you have to always be oleh, make aliyah, rise up, do things that lift you up from not looking down, but always looking upwards. And as the prophet Isaiah says, Su'u maromet einechem u're'u mi varat eila. Lift up your eyes and look at who created all of this, and then be humbled, be in awe, and feel a sense of the encompassing love of the Ribono Shel Olam in your life. So that's the first part of the drasha, and that's also its connection to Parshas Tzav, which is not in the drasha that you'll read today. Second part of the drasha is a whole different section, and it goes into detail to describe how when God first gave us the mitzvahs, before we left Egypt, he introduced us to the idea that every Jew has two personas. There is the communal persona, and then there is the individual persona. I have a uniquely vertical relationship with God that no one else has a share in. It dictates how I pray. It dictates how I observe mitzvot individually, by eating certain foods at the proper time and abstaining from certain foods. All of that is completely vertical between God and myself. But there's also communal Jew, the Jew who has to look outwards horizontally and see the rest of the Jewish community about him. The holiday of Pesach has both features. It has a communal feature and it has an individual feature. And I developed that idea a little bit in our drasha. And then I observe that for some reason, for some mysterious reason only known to God right now, for this year, Hashem wants us to observe Pesach not as a communal observance, but rather as an individual observance. And it's for us to try and figure out why that is, perhaps, and sort of introspect and say, Is there something that we've done on a communal level that perhaps needs to get a restart, a rectification, perhaps a recalibration? But for now, let's focus on the individual Jew. Is there something perhaps that we've neglected about our individual observance, our vertical relationship between God, because perhaps we were focused too much on the horizontal, the communal affairs, instead of focusing more on a relationship with Hashem between God and myself and no one else? And perhaps that's one of the messages of Pesach this year and how we're going to be able to get through this Siddharim. Some of us are alone, and some of us are just a couple, and some of us are just a very small family unit. But however we're going to celebrate the Seder this year, let's consider that it's going to be a different Seder, but not that it's going to be a negative experience, but it's going to be a very, very positive experience because we're going to be able to make the best of it. And I've provided you with some tips at the end of the drasha to be able to maximize the meaningfulness and the sense of purpose and the inspiration, hopefully, that you'll be able to draw from this very, very different Seder this year. And I'll just read for you the last words of the drasha. This Seder isn't just going to be fine. It's going to be great. You're going to be great. Become liberated. As much as we're physically separated, we're all together with you. May you feel Hashem's love and embrace, as well as His special message to you over this Yom Tov and every day. And I really mean that from Dvarim Hayotzim Min Halev, words that come from the heart, I hope go into your heart. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos, and I wish you a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a good Yom Tov. It should be a joyous Yom Tov, a Yom Tov when you rediscover new things about yourself, about your family, about your life. Try to make the best of it, and try to make it truly great. See you soon.